If you spend a lot of time watching old NASL matches like I do, you'll notice something. You'll notice that every team, or just about every team, played on artificial turf. Now, the plastic pitch in England did exist in the 1980s, though it was far from a common sight. But in the old NASL, just about every team played on the plastic. It was an odd phenomenon in hindsight, and it's kind of hard to believe today, but there was a time that people thought that the plastic would take over the entire sporting world. So let's take a look back at the history of artificial turf in the world of soccer. AstroTurf, as it was called at the time, was first used in the Houston Astrodome back in 1966. The Astrodome, of course, was the first indoor baseball stadium in the world. It was too difficult at the time to grow the grass indoors, and so the owners of the Houston Astros decided to go for the artificial variety of grass. That's where the name AstroTurf comes from the Astrodome. In the early years, the impact of artificial turf was limited. However, it was the wave of the future, at least we thought so at the time, and it caught on before too long. It wasn't until 1968 that artificial turf first showed up in professional American football. This was also at the Astrodome. The Houston Oilers of the American Football League moved to the indoor stadium that season. The next season, plastic grass made its debut in the National Football League after the Philadelphia Eagles laid the stuff down in Old Franklin Field. Interestingly enough, though, professional soccer in the United States landed on artificial turf well before American football. This is because the Houston Stars of the United Soccer Association in 1967 called the Astrodome home. In 1968, the Stars moved over to the new North American Soccer League, the NASL, and drew only a little over 3,000 fans in that spacious Astrodome. By 1969, the franchise had folded, just like most of the other initial NASL teams. But that wasn't the last soccer that we saw on artificial turf, not by a long shot. As the NASL started to grow in the late 1970s, its teams started to search for stadiums that would be large enough to hold the crowds that they were sure they would attract. And that's the reason why so many teams wound up on artificial turf. Look at the 1977 season, for example. The New York Cosmos famously played in Giant Stadium, which was new at that time. The St. Louis Stars played their matches at massive Busch Memorial Stadium when they expected to draw large crowds. The Chicago Sting frequently played at Soldier Field, another stadium better suited for American football. Team Hawaii, which only lasted that one season because of the ridiculously high travel costs, played in Aloha Stadium, which was also artificial turf. The Las Vegas Quicksilvers, also doomed to last only one season, played in the Las Vegas Stadium on the fake surface. Eusebio played for them. The Vancouver Whitecaps played at Empire Stadium, also on artificial turf. The Seattle Sounders played in the Kingdome, another indoor arena with artificial turf. And the Portland Timbers played at Civic Stadium, which used artificial turf at the time. By my count, 8 of the 18 teams in the NASL in 1977 played on artificial turf. That might help explain why so many clips that we have from that league involve games on the fake stuff. And of course, artificial turf had a major impact on how the game was played. There's a certain style of play that dominated on artificial turf. The more games you watch, the more that you'll realize that defenders simply would not go down to the ground to make tackles. This created a version of the sport that really isn't all that pleasing to the eye. The hard pitch, combined with the massive size of these stadiums, created a game that seemed distant. That's a huge contrast to the way that the game looked in Europe. You've got to remember, of course, that none of these teams were building their own stadiums. They were merely using whatever happened to be available at the time, which usually meant stadiums that were publicly owned, or sometimes even privately owned stadiums that belonged to other clubs in other sports. The New York Cosmos, for example, played in Yankee Stadium for a little while. In retrospect, it's kind of bizarre to watch, but that's the way that it was. As soon as Giant Stadium was built in the Meadowlands in New Jersey in 1976, the Cosmos moved in. The seating capacity of a little over 80,000 was overkill for the fledgling NASL, but at least it was a reasonable place to play. And that combination of artificial surface and distant stands gave the NASL its unique visual qualities. Now you have to remember that none of these stadiums were designed for soccer. In fact, the entire concept of an American soccer-specific stadium was unheard of back in the 1970s. Artificial turf also made an appearance in England for a little while with predictable results. Well, back in 1981, Queen's Park Rangers were the first to install artificial surface. This was a move that many at the time thought marked the future of the sport. And if you watch the video of old matches, it's really not hard to see the impact that the surface had. As was the case in the United States, the hard surface promoted a defensive style that was more about positioning and less about getting stuck in. The artificial surface encouraged a much faster type of play, sure, but the sight of the ball bouncing all around the place was pretty bizarre. And that's probably the biggest legacy of the old school tradition of artificial turf, the ball bouncing around like crazy and the players at a loss to do anything about it. It's kind of hard to imagine today, but there was a time when the American press loudly defended the artificial turf system, with quotes from visiting football dignitaries like this one. It's since been forgotten, but there actually was a time in the 1970s when World Cup qualifying matches were played on artificial turf, such as this October 1976 USA-Canada match that was played at the brand new Kingdome in Seattle. The United States won that match 2-0 in front of a little under 18,000 fans. That must have made the cavernous Kingdome feel eerily empty. It took a little while, but by 1980, FIFA put its foot down. It demanded that both Canadian and American teams start playing international matches on correctly laid out grass pitches. All of which makes QPR's move to artificial turf seem kind of silly in hindsight, of course. There was clearly a battle between traditional sensibilities and what seemed at the time to be the unstoppable wave of the future. But of course, that future never came. By 1985, the NASL was nothing but a distant memory. And by 1988, the few English clubs that had installed the plastic pitch were ripping it up. The rules initially prohibited the plastic surface only in the first division of the Football League. However, there were proposals to ban the surface at all levels. And in the end, the United States followed this trend back to grass in time for the 1994 World Cup, laying grass surfaces over the artificial turf in a number of football stadiums. Well, that was basically the end of the old days of soccer on the plastic pitch. In hindsight, it certainly wasn't a beautiful way to play the sport. In fact, I tend to think that the NASL's lack of long-term popularity was in part because of how bad the sport looked on artificial surface. It's kind of bizarre to think that people once thought this style was the wave of the future.
Caught it. Beautiful save. And there's John McGrain beating Burns. The ball goes to Towers. Towers puts it across to Leroy. But meanwhile, it's young Quinn moving up, and he drifts it through the...
And I guess it goes to show you that we're really bad at predicting the future. And I can only wonder what might have happened if NASL teams were playing in smaller stadiums with more reasonable surfaces.